Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today I got a good one for you. You know how we dig these conspiracies online, like these really fringy ones, like spontaneous combustion and that kind of stuff, right? Well, I went online and I found a huge list of them, and we're going to go through them on this episode. Ones you know about and ones you probably don't know about, which I had never heard some of these, but they're the greatest ones. I did some investigation on them. Hopefully I can find some photographs of some of this stuff. But I want to say for the record, I'm at a cigar shop. These are not my cigars, okay? And I'm taking a little bit of break from smoking because I did, thousands over 11 years. And so, not that I don't smoke, but I really have cut it down to about a tenth of what I used to do back in the day. For now, you gotta balance out your chemistry, see what's going on, see what it's like to live without something that you normally consume. So let's get started. The first one is a really interesting one because my grandfather saw this, and he used to tell the story, and he's not a tall tale guy. He's long past now. But it's ball lightning. There have actually been a fair amount of videos online claiming to be ball lightning with just surveillance cameras by railroad tracks and just, various locations. And it's always at the time of a storm. I have gathered 10 bullet points about every one of these conspiracies, but this particular one is almost like a meandering, we don't know what this thing is. I think I know what this is, but let me tell you my grandfather's experience, because he told me in the kitchen where it took place, which was super cool. So the kitchen was, I don't know how to describe it. It's probably about 15 by 15 feet in a little Kansas town. And it had a kitchen off to the right, a kitchen sink with a little bit of a counter and all the cabinets off to the right. Let's say we're staring straight towards the back of the kitchen with a little eating area. But he said one night it was getting ready to really storm outside, and it was definitely lightning. The lightning was coming, but no rain had happened, right? And one of the big things that happens when you lived in one of these little small towns, we used to hang our clothes on clotheslines instead of dryers. It's really good for whites, let's put it that way, because the sun kind of bleaches everything out. And so everybody has these giant T poles outside. They're about 4 inches thick. And oddly, they're welded together. They just buy them and I sink them in the ground, I don't know, probably about 3 or 4 feet in a big concrete base, which is a nice ground. And they constantly get struck by lightning. I was a kid once, I was about 15 years old, and one struck our pole outside my window. And it is the most eerie, loud clapping that you've ever heard in your life because it's instantaneous, right? It's only like 20, 30 feet from you. And you get the sense of like the electron, cloud around you. You get this static electricity feeling. And of course, your ears are just being compacted by the boom. And these things are so massive, they don't explode or anything. Anything smaller than that would probably pop. Like flagpoles will split sometimes, right? But these things are about 4 inches in all directions, right? Well, this had happened outside, and he said right when the lightning bolt hit outside, he didn't say it was like, he said a ball of lightning, a little plasma ball, went up on the counter, went in the window actually, which he had open at the time. Back in the day, screens were not always in every single window. And it sat on the windowsill over the kitchen sink wall, and then it popped over to the oven area, held still. Then it moved. It was moving really slow, and it hit a steel pot. I think he said it was a teapot. But as soon as it hit that, it flew back out the window. And he was just like, wow, that was crazy. And it had this sort of like phosphorus tone to it, right? This sort of, Now, they tell you they don't know what this stuff is, and I think it's pretty obvious once you get into ethereal technologies like we do on this show, that what this is a three-dimensional sort of loop of some excess electricity, plasma, that's coming out of the sky, trying to go back to the core of the Earth, which is a gigantic plasma ball. Remember, I'll say this a million times, nickel iron is not at the center of our Earth, because at 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which they say it's millions of degrees, there's no electromagnetism. We'd have no poles. It's a joke. So the whole universe is electrical. They'll tell you that the bowels of the sun has a plasma ball, and they'll tell you that the moon is hollow. but they won't tell you Earth is as well. Now, you can't live inside the bowels of the Earth on the other side of the crust. You just get burned up and melted down. But now imagine some of the stuff gets loose and is moving at a speed that is either equal to or far surpassing the speed of light, because ether moves about 50 times the speed of light as measured by Faraday, Tesla, and Eric Dollard at the RCA laboratory for I believe the Navy, which his father was an electrical engineer for the Navy. It's either Navy or Air Force. But a little bit of this comes off and it goes into its natural formation, which is a sphere. Because in its world, it's got perfect pressure. When this thing manifests, you have this gigantic boom coming in from the sky, and it has pretty much infinite power, right? So it wraps it around, creates this ball, and then it's going to seek path of least resistance, right? Now, the reason why it seems intelligent every time you see photographs of this, movies of this, is that it's going to try and void probably mass, and it's going to try to settle wherever it possibly can. You know, a lot of the UFO sightings in the desert, where people look up and they say these things pop out of the ground, and they see these chrome spheres, right? Some of them get to oblate kind of saucer shapes, but they look up at them and they're completely chrome. Because in that particular configuration of energy, everything's reflecting off it as if it were a complete mirror. So you see yourself upside down and backwards when you look up at it. And they say these things fly off at 2,000, 8,000 miles an hour, where it's just simply finding a path of least resistance in the atmosphere. Does it show up on a military radar? Of course it does. It's completely opaque to radar. But you can get tiny versions of this. They say, you know, some people were saying that they range in size, basically. And that makes complete sense. It just depends on the intensity of the storm and the utter rareness of this anomaly, where if you were to drop food coloring in water, if you really paid attention, you see all these wild shapes. Well, imagine that's happening around the speed of light. And instead of a glass of water, it's a gigantic lake of water that's just pure, which is our atmosphere, right? And sure enough, you'd probably get these crazy little anomalies flying around inside the water if you could get that to occur. So our atmosphere is nothing more than an ethereal pressure system, which is what the whole universe is, right? Or people have a problem understanding why the Earth would be a ball and how the atmosphere would be pushed down to it. That's how it's done. It's exactly like a bubble in water, except we change the medium into electricity. So I completely believe these things exist. My grandfather would never lie to my face. And he just nonchalantly kind of explained this to me. But he said when it hit the pot or whatever was on the stove, it rang like a bell. And the thing that it went out the window was its path of least resistance to have a full path out the house, because all the other rooms would have sort of counter pressure pushing in, unless he had another window open where it might jostle in and push out. I think that if you were to ever touch this thing, you would die or get extremely burned. It's probably obviously a DC version of electricity, but it probably also has a very limited lifespan and will probably dissipate as quickly as possible, because that's what it wants to do. It wants to hit a path of least resistance and unravel itself, right? But everywhere they say that they study these things, there's never any evidence. I don't know why. Perhaps just to get rid of the ethereal model of the universe, because once they did the Michelson experiment, which was a complete fraud, they subtracted out of your brain the methodology of creating zero-point energy systems and understanding that everything is pure energy, right? Remember, E equals MC squared was filed in the Zurich Patent Office, not at that equation notation, but the overall theory of mass energy conversions when sped up a year before Einstein was born, right? So try not to get lost in revisionistic history. Now, the other one is called the Taos Hum. I think I'm saying that correctly. Could be Taos Hum. This happened in the 1990, and it happened in New Mexico. And we know a lot of stuff happens in New Mexico, right? In Area 51 and maybe some S4. Who knows? Bob Lazar is telling the truth. It's obviously where the Roswell crash happened, and it was the place where Roswell, New Mexico Air Force Base was, where all of the world experts on weather balloons existed. That's where we put all the brainiacs. So in order to determine what it was, you have these individuals who are experts observing what they found in the desert in 1947, and they absolutely said, that's not ours, that's not a weather balloon, but of course that was the cover story for it. But the Taos Hum is a hum of 20 to 40 hertz that were making people sick in the region. Of course, when you hear some weird phenomenon like that, there's a couple kickback mechanisms they can use to sort of debunk this with the community if, in fact, it was like a military project, which, if it's real, that's what you have to assume it is. They're testing something, right? Could be a vehicle that created the hum, some reverse engineered wild vehicle that's anti-gravity. They might have put out this little hum and it started resonating with their bodies. Remember, the human body resonates between 5 and 9 hertz, right? Not megahertz, not gigahertz, meaning this is the number 10 on my finger. I'm holding up all 10 of my fingers for the podcast people. We don't hit 10 as a human being. We hit 9 to 5, okay? And so having this resonate with our internal mind, you never know. It could start oscillating us and we start having, sleep problems. We start having weird issues with our brains because they're not supposed to be vibrated at that level. But the two things that they use is mass hysteria, okay? You're going to find that in a lot of the explanations for almost everything I'm about to tell you, especially if more than one person ever responded to an event. But the other one is to simply say, this didn't occur, there's no evidence, wipe their hands and move on. What's kind of a funny little exercise you can do with some of this sort of information is just reverse all the debunking statements and see if you can find some truth in that. Well, it's definitely not Area 51. Well, then it is Area 51. It's definitely not a secret, vehicle flying over your house. Well, then it definitely is, right? So they debunk away from things that might be the very obvious solution to some of the issues, right? Well, and the other thing too is that, when you have a remote location, then you have really a quarantine level of scientific confirmation, meaning if it happens and no one of any professional, acumen is there to record the event, either in microphone form or electronic form or video form or all the above, then they can simply deny it. And what can you do, right? And I should have mentioned this is called the Taos effect because it happened in, it's Taos, New Mexico. It could be Taos. We know that there have been experiments in the late 60s, around 1967, for something called sympathetic harmonies, where they actually hit a human being with 2 different frequencies from multiple locations, trying to create a third frequency in the mind. And they perfected 7 states of consciousness. I've mentioned this several times on the show. Obviously, various levels of panicking, various levels of sedation, but the most scary one of them all was the zombification of a human being. And that does not mean Walking Dead zombification. What that means is you're sitting there in your house and you're basically paralyzed down to having no state. It's almost like shock treatment from a distant location, right? So they could hit you. And I will give you a scenario where someone says, over my dead body, they're going to take all the guns out of my house and ammunition. And they could use this sympathetic harmony on your house because they know exactly physically where you are down to like a centimeter. They hit you, you zombify out, UN soldiers go into your house, take all the stuff out, molest your wife and kids, and then leave, right? I mean, this is just seriously where we were at in 1967. So to have another event happen in 1990 where people were starting to feel ill, no one said they felt, paralyzed or anything, but just kind of keep that in mind. That technology has existed for a very long time. The next one's an interesting one. I've debated doing a full episode on it, but I just don't think there's enough material to do it, so I'm glad it's popped up. And this is the shadow people. And Doctor Who did a great episode on this with Matt Smith. I think it was almost the first episode of Matt Smith, and they did a nice sci-fi take on this. But the theory is this. People claim, and it's a multi-layered theory in terms of its occurrence and what actually happens, but the most rudimentary definition of the shadow people is that they're living their life, they're walking, they're somewhere in their house, and out of the corner of their eye, they see what appears to be the shadowy outline of a human figure. Of course, when they turn and look, it's not there anymore. And of course, that happening one time, if it was very vivid in your peripheral vision, will obviously freak you out, but you might convince yourself, well, it was weird. It was somewhere an anomaly in my head. But apparently people who see it once sometimes continue to see it and continue to see it in different locations, out in public, in their homes, friends' houses, and that kind of stuff. And obviously that starts to perpetuate some theory in their mind as like, what's going on? Just to take a quick digression, the episode in Doctor Who was that there was an alien that lived in your peripheral vision. And he did a really cool thing so that everybody could see it. I definitely recommend the episode. But there's something you need to know about your peripheral vision. We have only 3 dimensions of depth perceived when our 2 eyeballs bring together left and right images in your eye and creates a sort of a stereo image. And that's why you can see 3D. You know something's closer to you. When some movie that's a really good 3D movie from back in the day and something pops out at you, you jump, right? Now, obviously you jump even if it's a 2D proscenium theater, but boy, when it's in 3D, it freaks you out. But to the left and to the right, you have no 3D. But you get a nice benefit with your peripheral vision. And this is, I believe, something that developed over time, either by God, the creator, or some sort of evolution, where your frame rate on your left and your right is way higher than the frame rate straight ahead. And I've said this several times on the show, but if you're new, do this little trick. If you have a ceiling fan in your house, especially above your bed, or a sofa or something, lay down and stare straight at the blades. And they're blurry. Unless you got a wild mind, right? But now turn your head either left or right and view those blades with your peripheral vision. Suddenly, you'll start to see the blades perfectly focused. They won't be motion blurring inside your mind. The way I explain this to students is that imagine that you're Homo sapien sapien, and there's a lot of predators by the time we arrive. Either biblically or evolutionary, they're still in the story as being here before us, right? But you have a predator off to the right who's tracking you. A leopard, a lion, a cheetah, some sort of hyena, right? You need to know that thing is there. And we know there's a lot of insects and animals that only see things when they move. That was the big theory behind the fake dinosaurs that, in Jurassic Park, don't move and they won't know you're there. The primitive mind, the acorn mind, right? Well, when you have something moving, you need to know if you want to survive. And obviously Homo sapien sapien got to a point of utter domination of this planet, be it God's will or some other miraculous something from nothing theory, right? That's why I believe that persisted over time. Plus, think about it. How much processor power does your brain need to bring together a stereo image and then discern 3D? Probably quite a bit compared to just straight imagery on the left. So the idea that your frame rate on your left and right is actually way faster than the stuff right in front of you could simply boil down to the visual cortex, i.e. brain, doesn't have to do that much to rasterize what's going on to left and right. It just so happens it's a great technique. So now, let's go back to shadow people for a second. Well, I don't know if this stuff is real. I have personally never experienced any type of shadow people thing. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Doesn't mean you're not observing some other interdimensional being. It doesn't, right? But how many times do we look at people, right? We look at them on TV. We look at them in our telephones. We see them in real life. And we know what a human figure looks like. Now imagine that a couple things occur. One of 2 things occur. Just as an example, what it might be if it's not something legit on the paranormal level, right? When you burn, an image of something in your mind and then you look away, whatever was brightest is dark because your rods and your cones are now releasing all the chemical pressures that we're pushing down to create the image of something on the back of your retina, right? So it could be that we're staring at something and then we change our view just a little bit, and that image of a human being that we were just staring at some other location starts to imprint off in the distance of one of your peripheral vision lenses, and suddenly you feel like you're seeing something, but it's really just an optical illusion because it's starting to kind of refill the spot that was actually dedicated to the vision of a human being before. The other one is we just have memories of seeing things. So you look off someplace and a configuration of shadows It's not exact, but your brain is trying to figure out what stuff is off to your left and your right. Haven't you looked at maybe a tile in a bathroom and it's got this wild marble tile and you can see something in it? Oh, there's a guy's face, right? We have a tile back in this bathroom at this cigar lounge. It looks just like Michael Jackson. It's crazy. It's a little tiny centimeter square. It looks like Michael Jackson. It's crazy. So it could be that your brain is trying to prevent you from, being attacked by something. So it's thinking, it's saying, wow, that configuration of shadows for that split second looks like a human being. And your mind throws that at you in a very vivid way. Human being to your right or left, or some humanoid thing. Could be distorted, really tall, which is sort of what the Thin Man theory was that kind of goes along with this. And so by the time you look, it's not there because you're now getting all of the light information you need to cancel that alarm in your system. So just keep that one in mind. But the one that's very, very real, and I have spoken to 2 women who have had very vivid experiences with this. One was in Ireland, and one was a girlfriend of mine who woke me up in the middle of the night. I was programming in a side room, and I had music headphones on. I've said this story once before. And this girl is not one to ever panic, scream, or anything. I mean, ever, ever, ever. And I start hearing this weird noise, but I'm also listening to kind of electronic music, right? So I'm thinking, those guys will hide weird sounds like telephone rings and stuff and left and right channels to make you, think your phone's ringing. But suddenly I start hearing this weird thing, and I take my headphones off for 1 second, and I can hear her yelling down the hallway. And it's like, whoa, a woman who's never yelled since I've known her is now yelling down the hallway. So I get up and I haul ass down to the bedroom, open the door, and she is crawling out of the sheets because I got light coming in right from the window. The whole room is pitch black, and as soon as I open the door, it goes right on her like a movie scene, right? And I realize she's having a weird dream because there's no one else in the room. She's not fighting anyone off or anything like that. And so I said, hey, are you okay? Are you okay? And she's like, oh God, oh God, oh God. And she's like, she's seeing me, right? She goes, there was someone at the end of the bed in my vision. And she had like this paralysis, right? She couldn't move, right? And she said, it looked like Thor or you, because you both have the long hair thing. And he was just staring at me at the end of the bed in a shadow. And it freaked her out. Well, my friend in Ireland, she had a double sighting. This was crazy. And again, I had known this girl for months, talked to her. I knew her. She was very pragmatic about life, not like, oh, I got 10 ghost stories I want to tell you or anything like that. She told me that her and her mother were sitting in her bed. Her mom's on like a laptop. She's on her telephone. And they both looked up and saw a guy at the end of the bed. The lights are on in the room, and they can actually see this guy. They both freak out. Now, her father had passed when he was, I think, 27 or something, and this is quite a few years past that. He said it wasn't their father, but he was there. And they both looked at each other freaking out. And in looking at each other and looking back, they both lost track of the guy. Then they described the guy to each other, and they're like, holy crap, it's the same person. So it comes from a source that I actually believe, and I can't even believe I'm saying that, but this was a very reliable person who also worked in hospice and had lots of encounters with people passing and figures showing up in the room when someone dies. She said a couple things would happen when a person would pass away because she'd done it dozens of times. They'd hold their hands, at the end. And she said, one, the room smells like very clean plastic. It's a weird phenomenon that all the girls who worked there had experienced. This girl was about 30, and she'd been doing it for about 5 to 7 years, somewhere in there. But she said about half the time the room fills up with family members. And she says it's sort of an apparition thing, but they're all looking at the person in the bed. They're not looking at the hospice worker. And she said that would occur. And it was just, you get initiated into that experience, and then these girls would share it with each other, like, yeah, that happens, it's a weird thing. And the other one is that without being comical, okay, she said it's very common for a person who recently passed away to show up somewhere inside the hospital for the new girl and the new girl would escort them back to their room. And on one occasion, the brand new girl took a woman back to her room and was late getting off for her shift by 5 minutes or whatever, tucking this woman in, and she comes in and they go, where you been? You need to be on time because people are looking to get relieved, and she said, well, I had to take this so-and-so woman to her room. And one of the most famous stories was that they said, who? And they said, okay, where? Okay, let's go. And they took her back to the room she was just in, and it's totally vacant. She said, they told her that woman had passed a week ago, and she goes, that happens too. So in terms of shadow people and things occurring, there's quite a bit of evidence. I've mentioned on this show, I haven't had this in quite a while, but I used to wake up in the paralysis mode and feel like someone's over me. They're not doing anything to me, but the sad part is that you go into a state of fear. And that's so sad because we shouldn't be going into fear unless something bad's happening to us. But the fear really, I can tell you in observing this 5-10 years later, that's what happened to me big time in 2015. And I've told the story before, but I woke up and it's broad daylight because I sleep in because I work late. And this being is over me. And it feels like a shadow person. You don't feel like you have any distinct features and you really are asleep. That's the thing, right? This could be psychosomatic, right? But the paralyzed feeling, they say that when you go to sleep, you get this drug in your body so that you don't move too much when you're asleep, right? And they think it comes from they know monkeys when they go up in their, I don't think we're from monkeys, but when monkeys are up in their trees sleeping, that they'll get that paralysis drug. So when they wake up, they don't roll over and fall out of the bed, which is a branch, and they can hit the ground. But I had a weapon in my bed because I just sleep like that. And I remember trying to grab that damn thing to blow this thing away. I didn't know what the hell it was. And the whole time I'm dreaming that this is actually occurring. It didn't actually occur, but I'm just like, you cannot hold me down. I get very confrontational when that kind of thing starts happening to me. And I don't care if I die in the process. We're going to get rid of you, right? Then I woke up and realized, what the hell am I doing? This thing wasn't hurting me. It just freaked me out that I couldn't move. So that's probably just me dreaming up some figure, which really, freaked me out in real life, but it's not real. You know what I mean? So this could be something real. Don't discount it. Those people who see things at the end of the bed, I'm not quite sure who on earth my girlfriend at the time would have seen. I had long hair. It definitely isn't me yet, and I'm still here. So, and I don't think I would go back to haunt her in the past, So, not sure. But that's the shadow people theory in a nutshell. The next one happened in February of 1959, and it's got a Russian name that I will probably slaughter, but it's named after one of the key explorers. It's called the Dyatlov Pass Incident. And it happened in a mountain pass called the Ural, U-R-A-L, mountain pass in Russia. And this one's kind of interesting to me because this is one of 2 times this sort of thing has occurred. What it is a bunch of folks went up to do some mountain climbing, and then they were discovered all dead. And the weird thing was, if somebody, I watched a big documentary once in the IMAX theater about Mount Everest, and there's just all kinds of dead bodies up there frozen. And their deaths make sense, right? People just died on the path, froze down, and some people have been up there for 30 years. They've been trying to clean it up. It's actually really sad up there because the pollution up there is crazy because everybody's in the middle of some sort of, delusional state with hypothermia. And so they just leave their tanks everywhere and their food. It's just like a junk pile up there. But these people were found injured. They were injured in a way that they all were crushed. And you might think, okay, well, maybe that's a avalanche that got them and then the snow melted away. The other one is limbs were missing. Limbs were just completely missing off someone's body, just torn off, but fairly cleanly torn off. And so they were like, wow, this is weird. It's almost like someone just chopped an arm off with some sort of instrument instead of having it be ligaments pulled out where, someone fell and had you can fall and have your limbs knocked off your body. We're not made of steel, right? But these were very surgically clean. It's probably just shy of saying surgery, where the knife blade is visible and that sort of thing. But the one strange theory, because they never really solved this theory. And of course, every time you have an incident like this, you create a folklore story where that location starts becoming famous with people that want to go see. I mean, wouldn't it be cool to go see where they think the Roswell crash occurred? You know, when was it Jesse Marcel took the film crew out there to where he thought it was. You know, he did this really wild interview, which has been heavily edited since then. But what strikes me strange is, imagine they're crushed, so they're physically crushed as well, which seems to suggest to me, and I haven't looked up the terrain of this actual area, but if they could get up high and then all fall at the same time due to some slide, then their bodies are going to hit the ground and get crushed simply by impacting on the ground. And then, you know, it looks, you find them later on, you don't have the verb of the event in your mind. You just think that they just somehow showed up on the ground crushed, right? It would be like finding a body at the base of a skyscraper crushed on the sidewalk, and you're going, wow, some anomaly happened where this person got crushed on the sidewalk. Not thinking, well, maybe they fell from the 10th floor. You know, just putting that out there, right? But the limbs missing, well, that might be something a little bit more intense. So, of course, what's really cool about the Russian people, of everything I've ever kind of researched about their folklore, is that they're very open people to a lot of different things. And so, of course, every suggestion in the book, something extraterrestrial, something military occurring, where maybe a bomb goes off and these folks end up getting severely injured. What I didn't hear from any of the research that I could do on this subject, they didn't find the person's arm anywhere else. You know, the limbs that were missing were simply just missing. And they didn't appear to be, you know, anything related to animals, because the temperature at this location was 50 degrees Celsius below. So we're talking about upper 50 Fahrenheit negative. So we're talking about walking outside and you got seconds before you're going to freeze to death if you don't have all your equipment on, right? Now, the other wild thing about this, in addition to all this other stuff, because I wanted to throw out the obvious stuff, is that some of the bodies had very distinct radiation poisoning. Very, very strange that you would mix all this stuff together. So someone might say, well, it was an atom bomb of some sort, right? Well, what does atom bombs also do to bodies, right? If you're close enough to get hit by an atom bomb, you're going to vaporize. You're going to burn. There's going to be at least burn marks on the body. You're not going to just get crushed by some blast and be irradiated at the same time. Now, you could potentially be so far away that the thermal radiation, the heat that would boil you, doesn't happen. But then again, anything that big would most likely burn the surrounding area, like that big meteorite blast was in 1908 that also happened out there. That left massive evidence behind that it occurred, right? All the trees were knocked down. I forgot what that was called, but you know what I'm talking about. Now, the other thing that was strange is that this guy, Dyatlov, it could be Dyatlov, he wrote a message, and he said, there's no way we're going to be able to explain this phenomenon. He actually wrote that in a message. What's really strange about it is, where's the other text that gets at the meat of what's going on? Wouldn't you say, first off, you know, we were walking and then suddenly a bunch of us are dead. And I have the time to write this letter as I'm freezing to death because maybe I'm crushed to the point I can't walk home. Sometimes they'll insert things into folklore to make them more mysterious, to get, you know, I don't know, more people up there to sell hot dogs. I don't know. But this sounds like an extremely formidable area. The weather was not good at the time, and so it remains a mystery. Now, this next one, you would think you and I would know about this. If you know about this, you get the extra bonus for the day. It's called the Oakville Blobs. And this happened in 1994 in Oakville, Washington. For those of you not familiar with the United States, it's in the upper west corner. It's the upper westmost liberal state in our entire union. But what ended up happening on this particular day, February 26, 1994, is that these blobs started falling out of the sky. And they said that they were all different sizes, from from very small ones to ones about 8 inches, which is huge, right? I mean, an 8-inch blob falling from the sky. And so these things start landing and people start getting sick all over the place. People described nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. So it was some sort of toxin. And they said the animals also got sick in the area. How crazy is that? I mean, humans can get mass hysteria and start getting sick and all this other kind of stuff. But animals are not going to sit there and go along with your conspiracy theory, right? So oddly enough, the U.S. government gets involved with this and supposedly gets some copies of the blob. And of course, they say it's nothing, it has no toxicity in it whatsoever. Everyone's just imagining this, including the animals, right? Again, reverse everything they say and you might actually find the truth, right? So the other one was, is there some type of industrial factory nearby that may have burped these things into the sky? And of course, no one could ever find any traces of anyone that would be responsible for this thing, but it's falling from the sky. So imagine it's some sort of substance that for the short-term exposure has a toxic kind of response. It makes you feel sick. But over time, it dissipates. So when the chemists come in, they don't find anything. And it could be just like, hey, don't worry about it. Just go in about a week later and it'll all kind of go away. This is very similar to what Galen Windsor talked about, one of the biggest radiation experts in the United States of America. He said that if you're ever near some sort of atomic bomb and you survive the thermal radiation exposure and the radiation cloud after that, as long as you're physically fine after a nuclear fallout starts to fall on your yard, he said, look, just don't pile the stuff up. Don't sweep it up into a ball. He said that's the worst thing you can possibly do. He goes, you want to leave all of that fallout out there for 4 to 8 weeks, and it will be neutralized by the time it's there. And they actually slept that out. George C. Scott got a line inside of Dr. Strangelove, which is a comedy made by Stanley Kubrick, about 1964. But in that movie, 63 or 64, he said, look, I heard all that news. It's all crap. After about 8 weeks, it's all gone. And that's a true statement. When they take fallout and sweep it up into a barrel, now you have what's called shielding, and it'll actually be radioactive for a very, very long time. So if we want to ever deradiate any type of water out of a nuclear power plant, I've said this a couple times, they need to make basically pools in the desert of really thick concrete. All it needs to be is about 6 inches deep. You only pour about half an inch in at a time, and you just let that evaporate, and you pour another half inch in until it evaporates, and that will be completely fine. Because the more radioactive a substance is, well, what is that? It's shedding its materials. It's shedding its electrons, especially its orbital cloud. Well, it can't do that for 1,000,000 years. It can't, because it's shedding what it is, right? So imagine you had a marble in your hand and it's shedding marble. And it's just splattering marble out of it. Well, it's going to get smaller every single minute until it's gone, right? It's like a firework. So one of the other theories, of course, even though this is most likely hoopla, is that it was a biological massive spore from some location. And again, any outrageous theory like that, outside of the empirical proof that this stuff fell out of the sky, landed on people, made animals and humans sick, it was found. The stuff was found. This isn't like some crazy mass hysteria, right? To say that it came off of some Willy Wonka plant or some, World of Warcraft gigantic mushroom somewhere and not produce that mushroom, not produce the origin of this organic thing, the only thing I could think of is it would be some really toxic swamp somewhere and somehow all the bubbles are coming up and then it's got enough, viscosity that these bubbles start floating around just like someone with some toxic bubble bath blowing it in your face, right? Don't know what it was, and they're never going to tell us. But that's the Oakville Blob phenomenon of 1994. Stuff's wild, right? Who ever heard of this stuff, right? Now, the other one happened in August 15th, 1977. It is called the wow signal. This was a massive discharge of sound frequency at 11:16 p.m. in the evening. It lasted 72 seconds. Can you imagine that? 72 seconds. It was at 1420 megahertz, and it was obviously really, really loud. And it came from outer space, is what they think, right? Could be bouncing off the ionosphere from some sort of early HAARP technology, but this thing pounces down, and it pounces down. It's observed by the Ohio State Laboratory. Now, what's interesting about this is that Nikola Tesla also heard pulses from space when he was in Springfield, Colorado, I believe. And he essentially said, look, we have made intelligent contact with, aliens. And of course, here is the astronomy folks coming in to kind of dissipate that theory. And they told him it was a neutron star, where it's a star that's compressed down to neutrons, like no evidence this stuff exists at all except for on a piece of paper. And that in order to deal with its high compression is burping out, it's actually spinning so fast that it's got this little exhaust pipe. And as it's spinning, the exhaust pipe points at Earth and it gives us a little sort of Morse code thing. Now, what's interesting about Tesla, which a lot of people don't know, if you watch my 2-hour episode on Tesla, you'll find out a lot of great stuff about that guy. He was a telegram genius. He was like Tommy on the pinball machine with one of those bad boys. He could transmit faster and more accurately than anyone else before he moved from Europe to the United States. And so you're talking about a guy that understands protocol, a guy that is not a trivial-minded person. He claimed he had an intelligent discernment of the signals coming in. It wasn't in Morse code. It did not have a message he could decipher and understand. But he said this was not just a beep, 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 beep thing. It was beep, 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 beep. It was like a absolutely intelligent transmission. And this is way before any technology that would have done such a thing. He was the master of that technology when he created the remote control boat in the late 1890s and put it in the Hudson Bay in New York and drove it by remote control. I mean, like, everyone's so fascinated by Marconi transmitting, just raw signals through the radio, using about 50 of his patents to get it done. Now, this dude created a wireless protocol, a battery for the boat, a battery for his controller. And so when he said, go, stop, turn the rudder, all that was a communication protocol. He basically had a radio communication protocol to the boat. One could argue digital, because it had to know that frequency means do this, do that. So the guy was an utter genius. And of course, morons come by and try to poo-poo a genius. Like, when your IQ is not as high as his opinion of what occurred has to remain as the predominant opinion, right? So anyway, this wow signal for 72 seconds, right, was one of the sort of arguments and basis of SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that was out of the Bay Area. I used to drive by on the 280 in the Bay Area from Sunnyvale to Foster City, where I worked, and then San Mateo. This gigantic antenna that's down there, and it was sort of the kiss-off antenna. Now, every antenna in the world was invited to participate in SETI, but this was where a bunch of the signals actually occurred. I believe Steven Spielberg even went for the christening of the SETI program, which I just mentioned in one of my recent episodes. So this was, boiled down to maybe it's extraterrestrial. What I don't know is the WOW signal recorded anywhere where we can listen to it and maybe put some big machine learning on it and see if we find any intelligence to it. Since the big machine learning explosion of the last 5 to 10 years and all this SETI data and quantum computers, it would be amazing to take all of the data and put it through a quantum computer with the big machine learning algorithms on it for communication protocols, and at least see if in some of the white noise that we're getting from space, are we hearing anything intelligent, right? So that one remains a mystery, just like most of these, right? Now, this next one is really weird, and I had never heard of this before, and it's kind of got the Paul Harvey to the story, but you have to take it with a grain of salt, right? And this is the green children of Woolpit, like wool clothing, right? It's a medieval legend, okay? And it's called Woolpit Children because Woolpit is a place in England where two girls, according to Ralph of Coggeshall and William Newborough wrote this little story, and they said that these two girls show up to a village. Actually, sorry, a boy and a girl. Apologies. They speak a different language. So they show up speaking a different language, which, you go back a couple of 100 years, you have Gaelic dialects that nobody knows. You have barbaric languages. Remember, the barbarians were simply called barbarians because their language had sounds like bar, 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 and many of the words. Later on, they were very formidable, gigantic Germanian people, supposedly, and they got frustrated and beat people up. So that's why you're called a barbarian, right? But these two kids show up, and they don't speak anything of the common dialect of the time. And I don't have the year here. I do apologize. I'll try to put that on the screen. But the boy grows sick and eventually dies, but their skin is green. That's the strange thing. And the girl takes a little while to learn the local language. And when she finally learns the language, they start kind of trying to figure out what on earth, where'd they come from, right? So they say they come from a place called St. Martin's Land. And the little girl said, look, we don't have sun like you have sun. We've got sort of a twilight sun where we come from. And they said that they were trying to herd cattle with their father when suddenly they heard a loud noise that sounded like bells going off. And then suddenly they are from where they are in Woolpit, like teleported into Woolpit. Now, the strange thing about the boy getting sick is that they said he was healthy when he arrived, and that I guess maybe being exposed to sun, eating their food, somehow the kid gets so sick he passes away, which is, they're pretty resilient. Kids are pretty resilient. So to have something so toxic and incompatible with his DNA kill him, it's really strange. But the girl, managed to prevail. She said that she thought that they were underground, basically traveling underground, which, one of the theories about Twilight Underground theory, and this is like dramatized in Dungeons and Dragons when you play the game, is that there's a moss that when you touch it, it lights up. And I don't know why it would be lit up otherwise, some sort of phosphorus glow or something like that. But there would have to be a hell of a lot of this stuff. And of course, some sort of water break from the upper mantle down to feed this stuff so that it would exist and glow, right? It happens, right? So one of the theories is that they were actually children that were displaced by Henry II's suppression of the Flemish immigrants, and they were Flemish children. And that wherever their father had them, they were basically dying of malnutrition. So the kid shows up, he's more malnutrition than his sister, and he basically can't recover before he passes away. One could believe that, right? I don't know about malnutrition making anybody green. I've never heard that theory in my life. And I don't know what would be there to make them green. I think that if they're in an environment where there's moss that's glowing and they're in a mossy kind of world, it's like if you drink a lot of carrot juice, one of the rumors about Steve Jobs, or one of the facts about him, was that when he was turning into a vegetarian, he used to consume tons of carrot juice and his skin literally turns like a hue of orange. I've heard that several times. And of course, as historians look at this stuff a little bit later and try to decipher it, some people take the tack that this was an allegory, of what it's like to take in an outsider. And some of people actually said this was actually a story about purgatory, which is just weird. I mean, it lacks all the elements of a purgatory story. They died somehow, and then suddenly they're back alive again. The other theory, which is obviously more out there, is that the sound that they heard, the bell sound that they heard, was some sort of UFO, interdimensional being that basically said, you shouldn't be here. You need to get out with your real people because your bro's about to die. Why they wouldn't heal the brother, I don't know. And they put him out there in Woolpit. I guess Dad's doomed down there with his cattle. Obviously, this one remains a mystery, but wild. I've never heard of this in my entire lifetime. Another totally bizarre one. This is called the Dancing Plague of 1518. And this happened in France. It happened in Strasbourg on July 14th, 1518. This is a story about one woman that started dancing and singing. Dancing and singing, and she never stopped dancing and singing. Well, a bunch of people joined in with her, and they uncontrollably danced and sang with her. Until this whole town's like, partying like some Eddie Murphy video or something, right? Now, the interesting thing is that they continued dancing for about a week. Okay, that's a long time, right? And I don't know, in 1518, you don't turn on the jukebox, so I don't know if people are just singing outside their lungs, using their voice to sing and make the dance happen. I don't know if people are running around with drums, because they obviously had little tiny drums, and maybe they're playing some instrument. But what ends up happening is a bunch of people start dying, because for whatever reason, the people that aren't dancing, which is very few, can't stop the people from dancing and singing who are doing this, and they just are exhausting themselves. The causes of death were unreal. I mean, it was like stroke, heart attacks, fatigue, starvation, everything in the book. It was funny. They said it's 1518, but some of the theories where they had like spinal damage and that kind of stuff. I guess you could definitely look at someone's back in that day and go, wow, that thing's all twisted up. They've been rocking it hard, right? Now, one of the theories was that there was a lot of tension between the Catholics and the Protestants at the time. And all I can say is that would be a lot of tension between the two. And that what they had done is that in singing, it sort of was like breakdancing, back in the 80s, got rid of gang violence for a little while. The kids would stay on the streets dancing instead of shooting each other, right? Which is a real thing that actually occurred here in America, at least. So imagine that they're simply getting along for the very first time inside some action of singing and dancing. But the other one that's really strange, and I'm throwing this out because it's not on my list of stuff here. Many of you will know, and I can't remember the exact insects that are involved with this, but there is an insect that will parasitically infect another animal, and that animal will start dancing, right? And it's there to spread the seed of this parasitic infection. And there's a point where the animal's not even alive anymore, but its muscles are moving around, and it's kind of moving around. It's a crazy, gross thing that occurs. But we know we have the cat disease, where the cats infect your brain through their excrement, and you start to love the cat irrationally. And they've done tests, they've proven this exists. Rodents will also encounter cat feces and then lose their alarm when a cat comes around, and the cat can eat them. It's actually pretty brilliant. And they've said they're going to do the same study on dogs, but there's been no results that I've ever seen. So I don't know if their brains got infected with something strange, or if it was simply social stress being relieved in some manner. That completely makes sense to me as well. And we're not there to really weigh in on that kind of thing. This was a very bizarre 1518 story. Now, coming back to 1994, Riverside County, which is inland about an hour and some change from where I'm sitting right now. This one's called The Toxic Lady story. And it's a woman named Gloria Ramirez who is admitted into the hospital and dies almost immediately in the hospital. Happened on July 28th, 1994. She was only 27 years old. And she was laying down, and people are trying to help her. And here's the weird thing. She passes away. They said that her body was very, very warm, like she had some sort of massive infection going on. Everyone at the hospital who interacted with their body got sick, like really sick. One woman said that she would basically see apparitions of this woman around her for, a number of days afterwards. That she couldn't stop caring about this woman. It was really strange. Some wild, what they would call mass hysteria around the death of this 27-year-old young girl. Now, the thing you have to know is that everyone was wearing all their protective gear, all their masks and all that good stuff, and still got sick from this thing, right? So the hospital's like, okay, we got a bunch of sick staff. We have this poor woman who passed away suddenly at a very young age, which doesn't make any sense at all. And they obviously do a toxicity autopsy on her. And they said, look, there's no toxicity in this woman's body at all. Nothing. Zero. She died of a heart attack. We can tell. Now, to die of a heart attack at 27 would suggest a couple things, right? It would suggest either a congenital heart problem that you're born with or some massive stress that would happen on this person. Or she might, they didn't say, but to die of even obesity at 27, you'd have to be a really huge human being. In 94, we have a lot of those in 2025, but we don't have a whole bunch of that in 94. It's not like it's not possible, but it was never mentioned that obesity was a problem. So the other one is that people can get anxiety for reasons that we don't understand. And she could have, plowed her heart with some sort of, problem in her life. She at least made it to the hospital. But this was so real that the hospital locked down the hospital for a short period of time while they were trying to figure out why the staff was getting sick. So it's a very real situation. I don't know if the vision of this girl dying was so heartbreaking for the staff that started to manifest in a bunch of different ways, but they didn't mention anything about her physical description. And of course, today they just blow it off as sort of folklore of the hospital, of this event. So there's nothing more about it. No one ever figured out what the heck caused any of this stuff to happen. Very strange. The next one's a very interesting one. It happened in Australia in 1948. And this is called the Somerton Man. He dies in a beach. Well, he's found dead on a beach, basically. And he's dressed in a suit. He was laid down in a very relaxed position, and he had his eyes closed. It was December 1st, so it's their summer period. I think Somerton is the way to say it, but it's a beach in Australia. He has a hat on as well. And they search his body, and there's no identification whatsoever, which is odd, right? That someone would travel with no identification whatsoever. But he had this note on his body that was typed out on a typewriter in a very unique font, which is interesting. A typewriter with unique font in 1948. I don't even know where you would buy such a typewriter. Perhaps they're out there and we just don't know about it. But his letter said, "For those who would listen, I have a secret to share." And that was it, right? But they've searched his body for a little bit more, and they found a torn piece of paper with a Persian poem in it, which essentially said, "Don't be sad for what you don't have. What you have is enough." Some really philosophical thing for this guy passing away on a beach. Now, what I don't know is his theoretical age dying there. It didn't sound like he was at all of an age where they said, "Oh, of course, he's an old man. He just somehow flew to Australia. Maybe that was his fantasy place to go, and he just wants to lie down." I mean, if you ever go to Hawaii, you'll want to die there, I swear to God. They tried to scrape his body for additional fingerprints and DNA to see if they could find, someone else that was attached to the guy, and it was like zeroed out. So the theory of his being so invisible and so ghost-like was that he was either a spy, some sort of military guy, or a scientist. And whatever, seems pretty decent possibility. At least he gets remembered for being a very special person. He obviously was a very philosophical person to have this stuff on him. And it just seems strange that he would pass away and the pathologist didn't have a cyanide or something that would explain sort of what killed him, the cause of death, right? It's an unsolved mystery. I suppose if it was solved, I wouldn't be talking to you about it, right? So there's another weird one, very similar. It's called the lead masks case. Okay. Have you ever heard of these? These are wild, right? These are two guys in Brazil in 1966, and they're found in a clearing wearing two lead masks, dead, in a very relaxed position, as if they had planned on being there and dying. When they did some investigation into these two gentlemen, they found out that they had taken a motorcycle trip together and ended at this location. And so they're trying to figure out, what the heck's going on with this. Now, what ends up happening with this particular case is it gets to a point where they believe that this was some occultic practice that is just simply so elusive that we don't have any attachment to it. It does seem strange that these two individuals would put on lead masks at all and pass away together. Why put the masks on? That has to be some sort of symbolism for some sort of ritual, you would think, where you're paying homage to something else, right? Now, in addition to the sort of ritualistic thing, they found a little message on him, and it says, "This is for you." As if some sacrificial thing was happening. I don't know, maybe it was for a quiet riot. I don't know. Some Kevin Dubrow. So, of course, they're studying their bodies, and there's no sign of struggle. There's no sign of robbery. Again, they did confirm these two people were friends. And there was no sign of panic or anything, right? So in order to die together, okay, you can't just, I mean, as far as I know, unless you had really good mind over matter, you can't just lie down and go, "Hey, you ready to die?" "Yeah, sure, man." "All right, I'm going to die." "All right, you too." "All right, on 3. You can't do that, right? You have to have some sort of drug in you to pass away. So the only drugs I'm aware of like that would make you pass in a way that you wouldn't have some excruciating thing. You know, there's little death kits you can buy, but you're going to have pain. And so the idea is it's some cyanide thing or something. Who can just get cyanide? I don't know. The people that were from and lived in the 60s said, you know, one thing you don't understand is that there was a very counterculture movement in the 60s because, you know, war was going on. Now, this is Brazil, so I don't think they were off fighting any world wars or anything like that. But the people that found them said that the most disturbing thing was their utter relaxation and content in their states of being when they were discovered, which I think is very interesting, that was a disturbing factor for them. Now, the next one's interesting, and I have a little story of my own about this. And for those of you who watched the show for 10 years, you'll know that I've mentioned this, but I didn't know this had a name. And when I read Nikola Tesla's, I believe, 1919 autobiography, he talked about this, okay? It's called time slips. I guess it is a time slip. But what this is that you will be in a particular location. I've had this happen to me half a dozen times. It's a wonderful experience. And something around you will trigger this event. And what you end up, it's got some variations on it, but Tesla said that he would be looking at the world and suddenly see an overlay on the world. And that's what I get. I get overlays on top of the world. And there's one that triggers on a highway where there's a lot of foliage on the side of the highway. It's really beautiful. There's a lane in Ventura County where it's, I believe, 2 lanes going each direction, and it's just got foliage all the way down. It's this man-made structure, and it is just bizarre. It's almost like a video game level. And when I was in that for the very first time, when I worked for Jim Hall Racing, we had to go and get parts from this other location through this highway. And I remember just having this wild feeling, but mine is triggered by foliage on one level. And what ends up happening is that you get this amazing, I get this amazing feeling where it's very peaceful and wonderful, and it's like a different version of your world at the same time that you're in, but everybody's cool and relaxed, and it's not this horrible, insane planet that we live in. And one could say, well, that's your desire to live in that type of world. Maybe. In LA, I get a different one. I've had it happen 2 or 3 times in LA, where you're just driving down a certain street and, you know, there'll be some diner or some building or something, and I just get this overlay of a really cool mid-century modern, but slightly futuristic version of reality. And it always feels amazing, and you see it, and you have this wild, like, trigger feeling, and then it goes away. But this basically outlines in amazing detail this vivid visionary thing that you end up having where, again, it is triggered by other stimulus around you, right? And of course, you could say it's the dream world penetrating your reality and overlaying. I could go with that. That could be the case. But there are I will definitely say that when I have a dream and I'm in a place that's just awesome, right? It's all creative and everybody's cool with each other. And it's all multicultural. It's all good, you know? And then I get the feeling of this time slip feeling, which I haven't had in a really long time. Matter of fact, it's kind of a bummer. It gets you that sort of utopian feeling in your chest, like this is like a slice of heaven sort of thing, right? It's man living together with man, and there's just no confrontation whatsoever. Everybody is productive. Everybody's doing exactly what their purpose in life is, and they love it, right? It's sort of that overall feeling, right? And now, of course, the scientists come in and they're basically saying that we're misremembering things. And it's like, what do you mean misremembering things? It happens and it goes away. There's no memory, necessarily speaking. It doesn't feel necessarily like a memory. It feels like a teleportation sort of preview of what could be. You know, if we all just got if we started liking each other a little bit more, you know what I mean? The other one is that if people really enjoy sort of fantasy versions of reality, like people who say, like I'm a huge fan of obviously film noir and Art Deco architecture, mid-century modern architecture, like the old diners and stuff. I absolutely love those type of buildings. And so what they're saying is that we are harvesting out our desires and we're able to imprint that on society. And I don't know, it started happening to me in my 30s. Last time it probably happened to me maybe 5 years ago or so. But every time it kind of gets overcast and I'm on a highway, there's a special place on the 405 when I head down towards Lake Forest on the 405 where these just beautiful architecture with these eucalyptus trees on the side. I get this feeling. Eucalyptus trees are a trigger for me on this. It's really strange. And I didn't grow up with those trees at all. So if you've had any time slip experiences, do share it in the comments. I'm very serious about that. I'll try to look up on Google Maps some of those locations and put them in the video for you. The next one is called the Pollock Twins. This is a story about a family that had 2 daughters that passed away. And they passed away September 12th, 1965. And then in December 2nd, 1966, they had twins, 2 other little girls. Now, the crazy thing is the new little girls remembered being the other 2 girls. And so they started to recall tons of the previous girls' experiences, including their food preferences, artistic, color preferences, all these kind of things they couldn't know unless they were the other 2 girls. Now, I've said several times on this show, and I have a whole episode on it, I think reincarnation up to a point, I would say up to a point of being a human reincarnation makes complete sense to me, right? You know, if you told Walt Disney in 1955, after writing one of the rides, right, say the Peter Pan ride, right, and you say, look, this was a great ride, thank you, I'll see you later. And it's like 11 o'clock in the morning. And he's like, what do you mean? See you later. Well, we rode your ride. We're done. Right? And the dude's like, wait a minute. I didn't work, 10 years to design and build this park so that you would ride things once. Get back in line. If you really enjoyed it, just do it again. It'll be a different experience every time you ride the ride. By nuances, it'll be different, right? So I think I'll look at the universe and compare it to Disneyland. I get the sense that there was a lot more work on the universe and my state of being and humankind and all the other life that might actually be out there to come back and do this again. And really, you're refining your soul the entire time, right? We have tons of these stories, but this particular one was very well recorded. And so they continued as time went on to just continue to regurgitate more and more details about this. And of course, the parents aren't feeding them the information, so they do it back. The press got super involved with these kids, and they eventually kind of pulled out of society because they're like, 1966. They're just a little bit older than me. So they have had a lot of scrutiny. And of course, the scientific community is going to take a piss on it because that's just what they do. The psychologists were saying, this is just a bunch of shared memories between people. And I don't know how you say that with a straight face and not realize that you're penetrating scientific theory. It's like, oh, so you believe the fact that we do communicate without actually talking to each other. This has been proven 100 times, right? Where they put foreheads together in colleges for two or 3 decades, right? And then they put the kids in RF proof, radio frequency proof rooms and show the one kid a card and the other person knows exactly what they're seeing, So then there's the 10 monkey experiment, which was actually done with, I believe, 100 monkeys. Some people tell me this didn't occur. It's like, okay, I have sat down with professors who advise on movies, science fiction movies, a couple times, And this experiment definitely occurred. They took a monkey out of a collection of monkeys, put it in a room, and gave it a machine that if it figured out how to do this little maneuver, it would get a food pellet. It took about 2 weeks for the dude to really figure it out, right? Of course, they'd feed it in the meantime. But he always wanted that pellet because it was sweet. And so he eats it. So they go put him back in the environment, let him sit a week, and they bring another one in that they monitored where they were. And the one that they brought in had the least contact with the one that they had taught the little trick. Now that monkey could do it in a week. Put him back out there, let him sit a week, yank out another one. Oh, 2 or 3 days. Then, after about a month of doing this, every single monkey that they put in the machine, unless it was brand new, knew how to get the pellet out automatically. So these little dudes are communicating with their brains without going up to each other going, okay, this is the pellet, push the doodad, don't do this, do that. If you're a creative person, I'm just getting at the fabric of reincarnation and the way we communicate and just how malleable we are in this universe, right? If you know instruments, especially guitars, drums, whatever, piano, and you sit down with someone who's going to teach you, who knows how to play. I've done this dozens and dozens of times, especially with guitar. I'd sit with my buddies who are just shredders, right? And I'd say, how did I play that song? It's one of my favorite songs. You just played it, teach me. And I sit down and boom, I can, get pretty damn close in the 90th percentile of playing the riff. Then I go home, I go to sleep, and I wake up, and I practiced it all night. I was pretty good all night. And I wake up, and now I'm like 20% of what I was the day before. But then I go back with my friend, and I sit down, all of a sudden, I'm back to where I was. And the dude's not really teaching me much more. But his muscle memory in his brain is somehow transmitting to my coordination in my world. I've had this for every instrument I've ever played, except for the bass guitar. Do I think these girls were reincarnated? Yeah, sure. There's tons of cases like this. There's a kid in England. There's a little boy in Mexico back in the 70s. Little boy in Mexico, it was a big deal. He's born, he immediately he goes, hey, man, I'm actually from the other village over there. And they said, what? And they take the kid over there. Hey, he starts naming everybody. And he says, I was that guy that died in the motorcycle accident. And they're like, whoa, yeah, he just died. How old's your kid? Well, about the same age. This guy died. This kid was born. It happens. What's the big problem, right? It's an ecosystem. Okay, this one is weird. This one started in March 1943 in Mattoon, Illinois. It's called the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. It's Mattoon. I think I'm saying that correct. This dude was running around a neighborhood for apparently 2 years, spreading a toxic gas on his neighbors. It doesn't seem to be attached to any military thing. When they finally looked at the symptoms, which is severe vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and paralysis, okay, they said, wow, that seems very, very close to something we call Agent Orange. And this dude terrorized them like crazy. And at the last time he did it in 44, they never caught this guy. That's the other weird one. Would have been great if they caught him. They said that the dude had spread so much of this stuff in the neighborhood, or the neighborhoods that he attacked, that people were still bumping into it, and they had symptoms for about a year or two afterwards, which, if you attack the nervous system with some sort of poison, it could be a lifelong injury, right? But this was pretty severe and pretty empirical, meaning they found farmers with burns on their hands. People were bumping into this stuff and getting toxically burned by whatever the hell this guy spread around. So it makes you wonder if it's some crazy psychotic who creates a wild drug and a wild poison and then spreads it all over the town, then goes to the military and sells the patent. And then, 3 decades later, or 2 decades later, it shows up in Vietnam. The next one's really interesting. It has to do with cosmonauts. And these are called the Phantom Cosmonauts. And what this is a story about the fact that Sputnik, which went out, I believe, in 59, was the first object in high orbit that, people with ham radios and people with any type of receiver were able to listen to this thing beeping down to the Earth, moving extremely fast. In multiple countries, right? So for those who don't believe that stuff exists, well, you need to come up with how that thing was moving way faster than any vehicle, and it traveled further than any gas tank that we had available to us, okay? way faster than a U-2 plane, and probably way faster than an SR-71 on high, right? But what this story is that in the 50s, there was a radio transmission that came down with essentially panicking or communicating cosmonauts. So basically, guys way up there moving very quickly, reporting down to what they would hopefully be Russia for them, but that they were never identified, and it predated anything that was claimed to have occurred by any space agency of any kind. Now, the very difficult thing to believe about this is that the minimum mechanism in order to accomplish what this theory suggests is that it would be some intercontinental ballistic missile system, right? So you'd have to have Russia, let's just say they got really close to the coast of Alaska, and they could push a rocket across the United States such that we could potentially hear cosmonauts reporting down. This would require at least about a 4,000-mile trip. And then where are you going to drop them? Where are they going to land? They're going to land in the Atlantic Ocean and be dead? Or are they going to somehow make it to Russia and then parachute down or something? The sort of undertone, I will tell you, if you're not from America, would be that Americans would be apt to believe such a thing because they would say a Soviet country would carelessly throw humans into space, not caring whether or not they came down safely because it's for, country and whatever, for the communist movement to prove that they could do things. The idea that they would put humans in there first and not seriously just Sputnik, I personally have a hard time believing this particular one. Now, the first human flight with the Yuri Gagarin was in April 12th, 1961. So you would be in a natural progression of capability with his story. There are, plenty of stories that say that he may have done multiple flights before the 61 flight and that they simply caught some of the communication up there. The other thing could be, too, is that radio is a funny thing, right? Especially if you spend a lot of time figuring it out. And, the 40s started kicking out a lot of radio technology for the military. Imagine you have a single craft that's doing some high atmosphere, 40,000 feet, 50,000 feet, and it's moving like a plane. But you're broadcasting an antenna that's sweeping the country with a really gigantic signal down to give the impression that something's occurring that's not occurring. Sputnik could be one of those things, right? So we know that the Russians faked a bunch of their journeys in space just by the footage itself. We know we faked a ton of footage, like spacewalks that are definitely stop animation, where the astronaut that's doing the first spacewalk turns his head and looks at the camera, and that actually takes the helmet off, because you have to have a SEAL work in space. That's another great one. We have some listeners that are actually experts at SEALs, and they're like, there's no way I could work in a 0 Kelvin vacuum. You need heat and expansion to make SEALs work, right? Anyhow, the next one happens in 1977 to 1980, 81 as a matter of fact, and it's the Belmez Faces of Provence, Spain. And this was a house in Spain that the residents of the house, including small children, said that they were looking down at their floor. I've never heard this before. And they would see human faces just kind of sort of morph into shape on the floor, and that it would come with a lot of kind of spooky, ghostly stuff with it, where they would hear whispers, they'd hear laughter, giggling, a little bit of moaning here and there, just really like classic spook house stuff, right? So remember, when a movie comes out like The Exorcist, you give a lot of people ideas, and then they claim things. But the interesting thing about this is they're saying it happened for about 4 years. Now, in terms of children seeing it, we know that if children aren't programmed to see things and they see something, then we can believe it a little bit more. And of course, in 1982, Poltergeist comes out with the little girl flying across the kitchen floor, burning her bottom on it, right? This was actually very interesting. The faces were essentially the basic components of eyes, mouth, noses, and jaw lines and that kind of stuff to sort of illustrate it. But it wasn't apparently just like a decal of a face. It was just sort of some impression of a face. Now, the weird thing about this would be if some spiritual being wanted to communicate with human beings and it had any type of visual capability, the lack of literal communication sort of is where I draw the line. Why do a symbolic, weird, almost ghost story version of a communication with human beings instead of just putting yourself on the wall and saying hello? Forget the face, just say hola, whatever, whatever native language is there, and then having an actual communication protocol. It could be as easy as some, like in Poltergeist where they flickered the lights in the movie over the kitchen table. Do it in Morse code, just something more empirical, something more definite if you want to communicate. Because the other thing is that would mean that ghosts almost infinitely communicate in jokes and bizarre things. Now, there were a lot of photographs that were forged around the time of this thing to try and kind of keep it going, right? The research that I got out of this was that most of the photos were actually considered to be obviously forgeries, but there was one photograph. I'm going to try to find this photograph where they said they were able to see apparitions in a door. Well, the other thing that's happening in the 70s, and I can vouch for this having a father as a professional photographer. My father had a photo studio, so we had a whole development place in the back. But even after he got rid of that, we carried around black and white exposure equipment and the CMYK color equipment. We would set it up in the bathroom. We could develop negatives, slides, and do all kinds of wild exposures. So once this technology starts getting in the hands of people, you could do little soft exposures here and there and put people in. You could even make a little clay figure, take a shot of it with low light, and then use that negative and just do a quick exposure on top of something else. And you could mastermind this stuff with really no effort at all. So this one, I'm just going to leave it as probably a hoax. Now this next one you guys have most likely heard about. This went around with the Flat Earth movement as well, but this is the man from Taured in 1954 in Tokyo's Haneda Airport. This man shows up and he is lacking any real passport for where he's from. He's got a weird country that he says he's from. And there's actually a couple of these, I believe. Now, I thought it was the 1954 version where the guy had actually said he's from a country. And I thought, because of all the PSYOP videos out there about this guy with the other movement, that it was some, continent on some, beyond our disk of whatever. It's not that at all. The guy that said he was from a country that didn't exist, he actually pulled up a map of Europe and said, look, it's between France and Germany. It's right here, but I don't know why it's not on your map. So he wasn't saying he was from some other planet or some other continent. He just couldn't figure out why in his timeline, his country didn't exist there. But he said, man, it's existed there for a couple 100 years. Really strange, right? But this particular incident, they take him because they don't know what to do with him, right? He's kind of a weird, intelligent guy. I think he's European, as a matter of fact, in appearance, obviously. They lock him in a hotel room, and they put a guard on the door, a couple guards. And this dude disappears from the hotel. And they don't know how the hell he left. He left some articles behind, but nothing of any major identification, of course. And so his disappearance just rattles the Japanese government at the time because World War II had just ended. Now they got this weird white guy bouncing around the airport going as John Doe, and they put him in a room because he's from a country they've never heard of. He can't find it on a map. The theories about this guy are actually kind of interesting. So obviously he could have been a spy. This is like every time a guy shows up that they can't describe, he's a spy. But the idea that he would claim he's from a country that doesn't exist doesn't make any sense at all with any of these theories. But he's a spy, and they said that he could have been a Japanese spy, and they just figured out, oh my God, the guy got caught, and he's yanked out by the Japanese government, hence they don't know how he got out. They said he could have been a European spy, and they could have gotten him out, or some intelligence agent or something like that. The other one is just the very loose theory that he was sort of an identity theft and that he had basically concocted this fake ID because that's just what he does for a living, right? makes fake passports and that kind of stuff. They never solved this issue. And apparently, the Japanese government was trying to figure out, we can't have this happen anymore, so let's figure this out. So there'll be another one coming up here. This next one is actually very interesting, and it sort of dovetails into some of the movements we're trying to follow today with kids disappearing. But in 1954, there were the Sodder children disappearance. You have 5 kids in a house, ages 14 to 5. The house burns up, completely guts, right? But the authorities go in to find the 5 kids, thinking, oh my God, it's going to be horrible. We're going to find 5 children, carbonized in this thing, and there's no kids. The other thing was, just like the Manson murders, which were most likely not related to Charles whatsoever, telephone line was professionally cut. Just like in the Manson Tate murders, the telephone pole was cut way at the top. The telephone line was cut way at the top, so there's no way that Tex, with about an 80 IQ, could have figured that out. So there's mysteries around when this kind of stuff happens sometimes. But they never figured out what happened to these kids. But the oldest child, who was 14 at the time, Maurice, someone said they had seen her walking down a street in a neighboring town. Another one said they had seen Lewis, I think one of the little kids, staring out a window. And so what they had, the only thing they could actually come up with from a motive standpoint was that there was a farmer, I guess, down the street who absolutely hated this family. But you would think if he hated the family, he would kill the kids and not let them live. So it obviously sounds like someone abducted these children, or under, the oldest kid, Maurice, was 14. It could be that something weird's going on in the house, and they burned the house down, they all ran away. And of course, the older kid's like, I'll take care of the younger kids, it'll be all right. We know that happens all the time in LA when we have foster kids that end up down there on Skid Row at 13 years old. And of course, they get involved with all the horrible stuff that's down there. And then they get interviewed by the soft white underbelly guy in their 20s, right? And you hear these horrific stories about their lives. But the idea that they would have completely disappeared, not identified themselves later on, it's like someone tells you a tall tale and you believe it. Usually they swing back around and go, you believe that stupid story I told you. You're an idiot, The only strange thing was that the telephone line was cut. So it seems like someone got in and got these kids out. But a 14-year-old's pretty hard to control, I would imagine. Most kids at 14 can fight back and that kind of stuff. So this remains a complete mystery. This next one goes back to 1760s, and it's sort of a Beowulf story, and it's called The Beast of Gévaudan. I think I'm saying that right. This is another one from France. And this is a time when 100 people seemed to be slaughtered by some crazy beast. And they said it was wolf-like, but it was 8 to 9 feet tall. And it was just a period from 1764 to 1767, so 3 years, where 100 people, including sheep and livestock and stuff, were being slaughtered by this gigantic beast. Of course, the townspeople and a lot of neighboring villages got together and tried to find this beast and kill it. And they said, look, we can't find anything that's like this, right? Now, some of the farmers said, hey, this thing, we just witnessed this thing killing our sheep. Of course, we're terrified to get killed ourselves. So we ran away, but we definitely saw it. Now, wolves can get pretty gigantic. I don't know if there would be some sort of hybrid or a wolf that just simply gets further in life and eats some toxic goo and just, eats the right oatmeal, gets bigger. Now, if you travel the world or you talk to people who've lived in Scotland or Ireland or England, you will hear stories about werewolves and all kinds of stuff. If you talk to people from South America, they have the chimera sort of strange animals that they believe in that climb on roofs and do all kinds of stuff. I talked to a friend of mine who was a genius graphic artist, and he totally told me, because I believe this, my grandmother had one on the roof and out of South America. And so sometimes Loch Ness Monster and that kind of stuff, sometimes these things are caused by just an anomaly of a giant animal that gets people killed. And of course, if an animal were to come out of the forest, right, it's a formidably gigantic version of a normal animal, and it moves into the populated area, especially as we expand our civilization. Perhaps it's chased out by something else or gets hungry. It's eating everything in the forest or something. That's the first time you've seen it. And so it starts killing people. And the thing is, the reason, how could it get 100 people? But it's 3 years of 100 people. So you're talking about if you didn't have a defense mechanism set up because you never experienced something like this, right? Then it could get your goat because you just don't have fences up. You don't think about this predator existing. And there only needs to be one, but there could have been multiple, right? Who knows? Now, the fact that we're never able to catch this thing, that's where it starts going into folklore. I guess it could have run back into the forest. But you would think that just, and you're talking about a time in history where tracking animals was the thing you did to hunt. So you're looking at the ground, you're looking for hoof marks if you want a reindeer or a deer or whatever. You're looking at all kinds of predators. If you had something eating all your chickens, you're looking for coyotes and wolves and whatever. And you're trying to figure out what you need to kill. So 1760s, I would think you'd have a very astute community in terms of animal tracking and what have you, especially finding the footprint of anything that was 8 to 9 feet tall. And if you're talking about a wolf that's that big, that means it's on its hind legs. It's on all fours, excuse me. So its back is 8 feet, 9 feet. But the other one too is if you're terrified, you may not be able to put things in proportion. The other one is if it gets your goat, you're so ticked off that a normal wolf got you that you tell your friends it's Beowulf, right? Some big giant thing. Now, if Data was there, he would have got that thing. So this next one happens in 1900, and it's the disappearance of the Flannan Isles Lighthouse keepers. And this is one of those weird stories where there's a lighthouse. It's on a remote collection of islands about 25 miles off the coast of Scotland. And so it's kind of in a really remote location, and there were light keepers there, and suddenly someone goes over there, and they're not there anymore. The 3 men that disappeared are Thomas Marshall, Donald MacArthur, and James Ducat. So these guys vanish, and what's interesting about it is that lighthouse keepers kind of keep logs like captains on a boat. And in 1899, they found a note written, because they're discovered missing in 1901. They found a note in December of 1899 saying that a man in a yellow pea coat, which I don't know exactly what that is, came on board. And they also had some concern about an unknown shipwreck in the area. And the one of the theories is that you still have sort of like a pirate community going on out there where you have folks trying to live off the ocean, don't want to go inland, maybe they're wanted criminals or whatever. If this shipwreck near the lighthouse was there, they might set up shop on this little island just as a matter of convenience. Then they find the 3 guys, slit their throats or whatever, throw them in the ocean, maybe take them out to help and kill them later, or maybe they get involved with the shipwreck where, they all become pirates or something like that, right? But there's no evidence of where these guys went whatsoever. In 1902, they actually recommissioned and rebuilt this place. Now there's a little tourist thing that's going on there. So the other theory was that the 3 men were simply outside together in an area where if there was a tidal wave of some sort during a really bad storm, all 3 men get washed out to the ocean and simply drowned, and it looks like they deserted. I think that one has quite a bit of believability to it. The other one might be that they mutinied. Maybe they just got on their boat to go 25 miles back to Scotland and got killed in a boat accident, Not the heaviest disappearance one. We got the one from Canada coming up here. So this other one happened in the 1970s, and this is called the Overtoun Bridge Mystery. This is weird, man. There's a bridge, and which is actually in Scotland, Dunbartonshire, Scotland. Probably brutalizing that. These dogs from the local neighborhood, would go out to this bridge and voluntarily jump to their death off this bridge. And, one or two of those, you might think, wow, that was weird. But apparently a ton of dogs started jumping off this bridge. They get, a bridge, how the dogs do, they get up and they kind of think they're doing some geometry in their brain like a cat, and then they jump. Now, when I heard the story, I was like, wow, there must be something visual in their mind, the way that the terrain is formed, the distance looks closer to them, and they just simply think that the ground is right there. And they're leaping and not realizing that this is potentially, it doesn't say how far down the traveling is, but it's got to be high enough that these dogs are dying on impact, right? When you go to the Grand Canyon, for instance, I don't know if any of you have done that, the most mysterious thing that you're never told, because I don't think people know how to articulate it, is you get there and you stand on one of the edges, of course, and you're staring into the Grand Canyon. It is so gigantic that the other side doesn't produce a stereo image for your eyeballs. Both left and right eyes are bringing back almost a completely identical image such that your brain doesn't perceive any 3D. It doesn't look deep. It looks like a picture right on the other side of the ridge that you're standing on. It's a very bizarre thing because you intellectually know you're looking at a gigantic gash in the earth, or to do it expanding earth, right? Rip that big hole in there, right? So maybe this is the optical illusion that the dogs had. They never figured it out. I don't know if they rebuilt the bridge to to fix the problem. So this one I'm going to go a little bit quicker on because it's a duplicate of the Russian one in Russia. And it's called the Khamar Daban incident. Happened in 1993. Very similar situation. Hikers go up, they show up, and they're crushed. They're dead, and no one can figure out what the heck happened to them. This one doesn't have the radiation imprint that the other one did. Now, I'm probably going to butcher the name of this one, but this is the one I thought I was going to be talking about earlier, which is the vanishing village of Angikuni Lake in Canada. This is the one I saw probably 30 years ago on some History's Mysteries or something. But this is in the 1930s. This guy named John Gunn was going up to research this village and how they lived their lives as an anthropologist. And he had made trips, I guess, prior to the 1930s. But by 1931, he goes back, and they say it's either 31 or 32. He goes back, and the whole village is missing. The people are missing. But everything that they had left behind was in a mid-use. The way that they romanticized this in the 90s on TV was that you still had like food cooking in a pot. Now, I'm sure it probably wasn't actually fire and cooking, but what they're saying is the pot had food in it. And they just like, somebody walked by and said, we're leaving. And they said, okay, right? What's strange about this is they'll say things like, so some of the things they said was uncooked food, still in the kitchen, intact sheds and equipment, dogs left behind in their kennels. That's really strange, right? And houses with no signs of forced entry or struggle. So this is a voluntary exodus of this particular location. So they try to go with like, maybe a disease came through, maybe someone came by and abducted them all, like humans abducting them all. Seems a little strange. Because we're way into the modern age, right? I mean, I know Canada is a little backwards, back in the 30s, a little bit more rugged, the Mounties and all that good stuff. But come on, they're good. They got cars and electricity. Okay, so we're not talking about 1830s. We're talking about 1930s, right? So then there's the supernatural abductions, like a UFO comes down and picks these folks up. And what's interesting about it is like, okay, I haven't personally talked to anybody who's been abducted. I did talk to a gentleman who produced the movie for the guy that got abducted, I believe, in Washington State, where he said, the beam grabbed him up and his friends were watching and he disappears for a week and comes back and says, my God, I was with these Nordic people up in this UFO and they'd actually injured me during the process of lifting me up. And they were fixing me, and it was a Nordic guy with a robot, and he was telling the robot how to fix him up. And then he said that this other female came up and grabbed his cheek and pinched his cheek really intensely. I talked to the kid Well, he's in his 30s, but he was much younger when he worked on this film. His mother paid for it or something like that. And he said there's a lot that the guy talks about if you sit down with him that isn't in the movie. And he just goes, I just think that will make me sound crazy, but that's actually what actually occurred, right? So, maybe. I just can't explain how a village of people drops everything and goes, right? Because if you have a predator in town, some wolf or something, or a pack of wolves, you can at least all huddle inside of a home. And plus the wolves would be trying to like scratch at the doors. A bear would try to scratch at the doors. You'd have some sort of animal predator evidence that's going on, right? None of that. Well, if they leave for any reason whatsoever, that's fine. They would show up somewhere, right? Even if a flood went through and nailed them. Well, they said, well, maybe a flood did it. And it's like, okay, I guess you've never been in a flood, because there's plenty of evidence when floods come around. If you had a pot of food cooking and the flood comes up so bad that you got to leave, then it's probably hit the ceiling, which means you got all kinds of brush and mud and everything. Just ask anybody. Heck, if a toilet backed up today in 2025, you'll know, right? So some of these excuses are absolutely absurd. Abducted, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's like, hey, come with us. You're going to live a great life in Alpha Centauri. Thumbs up. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, great. I'm not going to eat porridge anymore. This is great. Oh, it's warm in here too, right? I don't know. That one's always kind of sat strange with me, because if they got washed away in a flood, let's just say, then their bodies would be somewhere down in the woods. Like a whole village of people. You might miss a few because the predators eating them up. But come on, there'd be some ragdoll person down there inside the mud somewhere. Plus, I just think there'd be ample evidence of such a thing occurring. Plus, muds don't affect just one town. They usually affect an entire community, and the whole community go, oh, it's that flood. That happened last year. Oh, my God, they must have got nailed. We should go look for bodies so we can bury them and give them a graceful exit. I don't buy that at all. In terms of someone coming in and roughhousing them all, well, there'd be a struggle, wouldn't there? Probably a bullet here and there. They got to hunt for food. They got guns. They've got something to kill animals with and skin them and cook and all that good stuff. So very interesting. That one has always been a very strange thing. So that is your list. I'm hitting 2 hours on my side. Probably edit down a little bit. It's going to take a while to edit this one because I'm going to come up with some photographs. I love this stuff. I hope you guys dig it too. Go look some of this stuff up. It's absolutely crazy. Maybe I'll put the list inside the description so you at least know the names of what I've covered in here. God, if I forget, just remind me in the comments. I'll get it in there. Anyhow, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, there's a ton of this stuff up there. Go look at our top picks, a lot of good stuff like this. I'm going to be adding a whole nother list up there, which is going to be called sort of Waking Up. If you're coming on video, there's audio. If you haven't seen our store, we got some really fun shirts up there. And we have stock, and the shirts are just really nice. I mean, I put one on yesterday, my Apollo one, and it's just 100% cotton, so the frequency is good for your body. Hopefully these shirts last a really long time in your closet. If you're coming through from Patreon, it is now free. So you're more than welcome to join the $5 tier. I don't even know how to delete it. They won't let me delete it. I've actually paused billing on my side, but they're going to start it back up, and I'm not going to fight them. So if you want to donate, you can donate. That's great. But everything that's up there is up there. The only big benefit is that you'll get the audio drop as soon as it happens, regardless if the audio is on the website. But to all those folks that have been donating on there, thank you so much. Still got PayPal in case you wanted to shoot something over. It pays for all kinds of stuff. Anyhow, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.